Royal family in mourning. After unexpected tragedy at Buckingham Palace. In a chilling overnight blaze, a fire ripped through part of the royal estate, leaving devastation, heartbreak, and 2 lives lost. King Charles and Queen Camilla were just rooms away when the inferno began. Now, the nation reels as the monarchy faces its most personal crisis in decades. Staff are dead. Questions are rising, and the palace has fallen into silence and sorrow. This is more than tragedy. This is the monarchy's moment of reckoning. Flames in the dark. January 14, 2025 began in silence but ended in chaos. Temperatures had dropped below -3 degrees Celsius in Norfolk, and a light frost blanketed the grounds of Sandringham Estate. At exactly 2:42 a.m., a faint orange glow appeared in the east wing, first mistaken by a guard for a lantern or trick of moonlight. Within minutes, alarms pierced the silence. Smoke poured from the upper corridors. The royal estate, a sanctuary for over a century, was now under siege by fire. Inside, King Charles III and Queen Camilla slept just rooms away from the growing inferno. Their private security team, stationed nearby, was the first to respond. Simultaneously, Sir Clive Alderton, the king's most trusted advisor, rushed toward the source, trying to ensure the safety of both monarch and staff. Hallways thickened with smoke. Fire doors jammed. Charles, woken by shouts, refused immediate evacuation. "Not until everyone is out," he told his chief of security. His voice, hoarse but resolute, would echo in witnesses' minds for days. Evacuation protocols kicked in, well-practiced but not foolproof. Camilla was escorted through the servants' wing by 2 armed officers, her face pale, beneath a hastily donned coat. Staff sprinted from their quarters, some barefoot, some carrying radios, others choking on the thickening air. Flames breached the east stairwell by 2:54 a.m., and electrical failure followed. The king was finally pulled from the corridor by a security officer, just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. But 3 staff members remained unaccounted for. By 3:11 a.m., the fire had consumed half the wing. Sirens wailed in the distance. Charles stood outside in the frozen dark, still in slippers and a robe. A Range Rover, engine running, waited to take him to safety. He refused to enter. "Not yet," he said again. In the smoke and confusion, Margaret Thornton, James Whitmore, and Sir Clive were missing, and the king would not leave them behind. The fire at Sandringham wasn't just a structural emergency, it was a human one. As flames gutted the East Wing, the royal family faced the unthinkable. Not just loss of property, but of people. The balance between royal protection and staff safety had never felt more brutally exposed. And as smoke rose over one of Britain's most iconic estates, the monarchy found itself trapped in a crisis no protocol could solve. The question was no longer how bad it was, but who hadn't made it out. The evacuation! By 3:20 a.m., the situation at Sandringham had deteriorated beyond prediction. Emergency crews from Norfolk Fire and Rescue were en route, lights flashing across the country lanes, but the estate's remoteness delayed their arrival. Inside, fire spread along Victorian floorboards, leaping between hidden air shafts and aging paneling. Royal security, trained for terror threats, not infernos, struggled to manage the chaos. King Charles, standing by the service entrance, demanded hourly updates, but time moved faster than answers. Camilla, coughing and dazed, was escorted to a waiting vehicle by Chief Inspector Rowan Hale, who noted that she was shaking but composed. Charles, however, remained on foot, pacing through frozen grass in a haze of smoke and guilt. He refused blankets, refused transport. "This is my house," he kept saying. The king's determination, though noble, began interfering with operations until aides forcibly ushered him to a secure perimeter zone near Wood Farm, a nearby lodge on the estate. At 3:28 a.m., fire trucks finally arrived, 27 minutes after the initial alarm. Quick by most standards, but too slow for those already inside. 2 staff members were pulled from a lower hallway, coughing, disoriented, one with second-degree burns. Aides frantically called names, radios crackled with confusion. "Where's Clive? Has anyone seen James? Margaret's keys are still in her room." The fire refused to yield. Rooms collapsed into each other. By 4 a.m., the East Wing was beyond salvage. 3 names remained unanswered. The king refused rest. Even as medics tried to administer oxygen, he asked for updates every 4 minutes. "Tell me when we find them," he said to every aide who passed. A royal chauffeur, standing beside a running Range Rover autobiography, whispered that the engine had been idling for over an hour. Charles waved him off. The fire had become more than a crisis. It was a test, not of architecture, but of conscience. Dawn approached, but clarity did not. The fire crews pressed on, battling collapsing beams and searing temperatures, but hope was dwindling. A name was finally called: Sir Clive Alderton, found alive, barely. But the other 2, Margaret Thornton and James Whitmore, remained missing. Every hour that passed without news felt heavier than the last. And as the king waited at Wood Farm, the palace began preparing for a fate that no one dared name out loud. Loss inside the royal family's own walls. The missing. Just after 4:47 a.m., word came through the radio. Sir Clive Alderton, unconscious but alive, had been found near the scorched library corridor. His clothes were burned, skin blistered, lungs damaged from smoke inhalation. Medics rushed him to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn, where he was placed in an induced coma. But 2 remained. Despite valiant efforts by Norfolk Fire and Rescue, no signs of Margaret Thornton, 62, or James Whitmore, 28, had emerged. Their names echoed in radio calls. No one answered. As dawn broke over Sandringham, it cast an eerie light on the skeletal remains of the East Wing. Stone chimneys stood against the sky, but the wooden interiors had been reduced to ash. Fire investigators moved through the remains with poles and dogs, searching room by room. Charles and Camilla, now at Wood Farm, sat in stunned silence. The Queen spoke only once. They were just trying to sleep. It was 7:12 a.m. when the search resumed in earnest. By 9:36 a.m., the truth arrived. Margaret was found in her private quarters, collapsed just feet from the bathroom she often kept warm with a personal heater. She'd served the estate for 18 years. Known to staff as Maggie, she was beloved, meticulous, and loyal beyond measure. James Whitmore was found near a collapsed hallway door, just steps from an exit. Young, sharp, and newly promoted, James had joined the private office only 10 months earlier. Both had died in service. Charles received the news seated alone by a fireplace at Wood Farm. An aide delivered the update gently, but it did not soften the blow. The king bowed his head. No words, no tears, just silence that lasted 11 minutes. Camilla eventually took his hand, while aides left the room. Within the hour, Prince William arrived to join his father. The mood was clear. Mourning had begun, and guilt had taken root. Confirmed dead. By 10:12 a.m., the palace confirmed what everyone feared. Margaret Thornton and James Whitmore were dead. Margaret, 62, was found beside her bed, likely overcome by smoke before she could reach the door. James, 28, had collapsed near a scorched corridor exit, just seconds from survival. The image haunted fire investigators. Both had worked directly for the king and queen. Both had served with unwavering loyalty. And now, their names would be remembered not for scandal or privilege, but for sacrifice. The king received the formal briefing seated in the study at Wood Farm. The room was silent. Camilla sat beside him, hands clasped, face ashen. When the officer finished speaking, Charles closed his eyes and did not speak for several minutes. Aides say he looked gutted beyond recognition. Then he stood, walked to the desk, and began writing. One letter to Margaret's daughter, Sarah. Another to James's parents, Richard and Susan Whitmore. Each word, written in his hand, carried sorrow and shame. Outside Sandringham's gates, news had already spread. By midday, BBC, Sky News, and international outlets were broadcasting live from the perimeter. The headlines were unified. Fire at Sandringham, 2 dead, 1 injured. The palace issued a rare, emotionally charged statement. The king and queen are in mourning following the tragic deaths of 2 loyal members of staff. Sir Clive Alderton remains in critical condition. Our hearts are with the families. The tone was raw, stripped of royal polish. Across the nation, grief turned public. Condolences poured in from number 10 Downing Street, Scotland's First Minister, and even President Elena Foster of the United States, who tweeted, "A terrible loss for Britain's royal family. Our hearts are with the king outside the gates of Buckingham Palace." Flowers began appearing, but behind the scenes, the palace was already bracing for the next blow. Not one of fire, but of accountability. As the flames cooled and the mourning deepened, another force took hold: scrutiny. Sandringham wasn't a derelict property. It was a royal residence, maintained by one of the wealthiest institutions in Britain. So how did fire rip through it unchecked? How could loyal staff perish in one of the most protected estates in the world? The nation grieved, yes, but it also asked, who let this happen? And as fire crews combed the rubble, the answer began to emerge. From wires, dust, and decades of delay. Behind the flames. The formal investigation began just 36 hours after the fire. Norfolk Fire and Rescue, in collaboration with Royal Estates Maintenance, deployed a full forensic team to trace the blaze's origin. Early findings pointed to the East Wing's second-floor reading room, a space rarely used by the public, but favored by Queen Camilla for its privacy. Investigators discovered the source, a fault in the electrical system, traced to wiring installed in the 1960s and flagged multiple times in internal reports. The fire had started behind a wall panel, sparked by degraded insulation and overloaded circuits. From there, it had traveled upward through narrow air gaps and old timber framing. The estate's internal fire containment system had failed to seal the upper wing. No fire barriers had ever been installed in that section, due to its protected historical status. Documents revealed that rewiring had been scheduled for spring 2025, after the next budget cycle. But by then, it was too late. Further scrutiny uncovered a damning detail. In late 2023, Margaret Thornton herself had flagged electrical issues in a memo to the deputy estate manager, noting flickering lights, warm sockets, and a burning odor near the library corridor. Her concerns were noted, but postponed. The delay was chalked up to funding constraints. The system wasn't criminally negligent, but it was dangerously bureaucratic. The conclusion was chilling in its simplicity. The fire had been preventable. The palace was informed within 3 days. When Charles received the draft report, his face reportedly turned white. The images of Margaret and James now collided with official failure. He read it once, then again, then asked to be left alone. The same sentence appeared multiple times in the report. Deferred maintenance was a contributing factor. For Charles, a man who prided himself on detail and stewardship, it was a sentence that would never stop echoing. What began as a personal tragedy was now a public reckoning. The king wasn't just grieving, he was implicated. For decades, royal properties had balanced legacy with cost, heritage with safety. Now the balance had tipped fatally. As Charles stood before a grieving nation, the question had shifted from what happened to who allowed it. And though the report spared him of criminal blame, it demanded something far more painful: moral responsibility. And the king would have to carry it. Royal responsibility. In the days following the investigation's findings, King Charles III retreated from public view. Remaining at Wood Farm, he took no calls, cancelled all audiences, and requested only Prince William and Princess Anne visit. When the full report was delivered by Sir Malcolm Braithwaite, senior auditor of the royal estate, Charles reportedly wept. "They trusted us," he said again and again. The fire was not caused by malice, but by inaction. And inaction, in the eyes of the king, was failure. William arrived at the estate on the 4th day after the fire. The heir apparent had never seen his father so undone. They sat together, in silence, for nearly an hour. When Charles finally spoke, it was to say one word: accountability. William nodded. They both knew what had to come next, not just statements or tributes, but change. And that change would begin with public admission of royal failure. There would be no hiding. Not this time. Princess Anne, ever the pragmatist, flew in from Gloucestershire and immediately requested access to the maintenance records. A former Royal Navy officer, Anne understood chain of command and saw where it had broken. She offered her support, but not her sympathy. "You have to own this," she told Charles directly. It was a moment of blunt honesty between siblings, and it left its mark. By the end of that meeting, Charles had made a decision. The monarchy would face this head-on. The statement came the following morning. Buckingham Palace announced a full safety audit of all royal residences, including Balmoral, Windsor Castle, and Buckingham Palace itself. All scheduled repairs were to be reviewed and, if needed, accelerated. No cost cap, no delays. Charles addressed the nation briefly, calling the fire a tragedy born of our own failings. It was his most vulnerable moment as king, and his most honest. The crown had cracked. Now it had to be reforged. The families. When the door knocked at 8:41 a.m. on January 16th, Sarah Thornton, daughter of Margaret, already knew. 2 palace representatives, one uniformed, one civilian, stood on her Norwich doorstep, their faces rigid with grief. They offered condolences and the king's handwritten letter. But Sarah's sorrow quickly turned to frustration. "My mum told them," she said later. "She told them about the wiring. And they did nothing. Her mother hadn't just died in a fire. She'd died after being ignored." For Richard and Susan Whitmore, parents of James, the call came from a royal liaison officer at 10:03 a.m. It was brief, respectful, but hollow. Their son, 28 years old, had died in service to the crown. Susan collapsed to the floor. Richard asked one question over and over. Why was he still inside? James had just been promoted. He loved his job, and now his royal ambition had cost him everything. They would never be the same. Public anger simmered. Social media surged with comparisons to past royal excesses. Hashtags like #SandringhamFire and #Justice for James trended across the UK. A photo of Margaret standing beside Queen Elizabeth II at a 2009 staff luncheon went viral. People weren't just mourning, they were asking for accountability. Palace representatives attempted to offer private funds, but the gesture felt transactional. No amount of money brings him back, Richard said during an interview with ITV. We want honesty, not hush. That honesty came from an unexpected source, Princess Anne. She requested to meet both families personally, without press, without protocol. On January 20th, she visited Sarah in Norfolk and the Whitmores in Essex. She didn't come to defend the crown, she came to listen. Her blunt sincerity surprised them. She told us this was avoidable, Sarah said. And she said it won't be again. For the first time, the families believed change might actually follow. As grief settled and truth emerged, the monarchy faced a question it had long evaded. Could royal tragedy lead to meaningful reform? The palace had acknowledged fault. The public had demanded more. And the families, torn by loss, had forced the crown to speak plainly. But mourning wasn't enough. There had to be tribute. There had to be purpose. And so, beneath the ancient trees of Sandringham, the monarchy began to prepare something it had not done in decades. A memorial not for royals, but for the loyal. Mourning with meaning. January 25th, just 11 days after the fire, a private memorial service was held at St. Mary Magdalene Church on the very grounds of Sandringham Estate. No television cameras, no public invite. Only family, staff, and a select circle of royal aides attended. It was the same chapel where the royal family attended Christmas services each year. But this time, there were no carols, only grief. The pews were filled with tears, regret, and unspoken promises. King Charles III, dressed in a dark coat and holding a folded speech, stood before the two families and an altar lined with white lilies. His voice trembled. They were not born into this life, but they carried it with dignity, he said. We failed them. I failed them, and that truth must live here with us forever. The room was still. For a monarch trained to remain above emotion, this was raw, unfiltered sorrow. Queen Camilla dabbed her eyes. William lowered his head. After the service, Charles met both families in private. No photographers, no aides. He spoke with them for nearly an hour, apologizing not only for their loss, but for the system that allowed it. There will be changes, he said to Sarah Thornton, gripping her hand. Your mother will be remembered in every brick we replace. James's parents received similar words. When asked what he wanted most, Richard Whitmore said simply, "Make sure no one else dies like this." Outside the chapel, two new plaques were quietly unveiled, one for Margaret Thornton, another for James Whitmore. Beneath their names were the words, "In loyal service to the crown," and "In sacrifice." A third plaque was left blank, for future reforms. For the monarchy, it marked a rare shift, from symbolism to substance, from silence to sincerity. The memorial was powerful, but tribute alone couldn't protect others. Change had to outlive grief. The palace now faced its next challenge: translating sorrow into safeguards. Across estates, from Balmoral to Windsor, whispers turned into orders. Audits began, budgets shifted, and inside the monarchy, the will to modernize gained momentum. For Charles, the task was no longer ceremonial. It was redemptive. And in memory of two loyal staff, the king would lead a transformation the firm could no longer delay. What happens next? In the weeks that followed the fire, sweeping reforms were launched under the banner of the Royal Property Safety Initiative. Every royal estate, from Buckingham Palace to Balmoral Castle, was subjected to accelerated fire safety inspections. External contractors, not palace staff, were brought in for transparency. Electrical rewiring projects were fast-tracked. Walls once deemed protected by heritage law were retrofitted with fire barriers. "Safety will not wait for red tape," said a palace spokesperson. For once, the institution moved faster than its critics. The king approved £28 million in emergency funds, diverting money from ceremonial renovations toward staff infrastructure. The move was unprecedented and telling. Aides whispered that Charles had personally slashed his 2026 coronation anniversary budget to cover it. Meanwhile, William and Catherine took on more frontline duties, projecting stability, while Charles remained largely out of public view. It wasn't abdication, it was stewardship. Memorial funds were established in Margaret's and James's names, scholarships for aspiring public servants, and grants for domestic staff safety training. Princess Anne was appointed patron of both, vowing they'd be more than gestures. Royal household protocols were rewritten. All staff residences now required modern fire alert systems, annual electrical audits, and mandatory emergency training. The royal family had learned the cost of delay. It would not forget. And then, a whisper of light. Sir Clive Alderton awoke from sedation. Upon learning of Margaret and James, he wept openly. His first question, did they make it? Nurses say his heart rate spiked when told the truth. Charles visited quietly, sitting beside him for nearly 2 hours. They spoke few words, but in that silence was understanding. This was a new monarchy now, one forged not by tradition alone, but by tragedy, and the determination never to repeat it. A crown changed by fire. Sandringham House, once a symbol of royal continuity, now stands empty, its east wing cordoned off, its walls blackened by ash. The estate will remain closed indefinitely, not for secrecy, but for memory. The royal family no longer hides behind its grandeur. It remembers within it. Margaret Thornton and James Whitmore will never see royal titles or portraits, but they reshaped the institution in death more than most did in life. King Charles III, once hesitant to modernize the firm too swiftly, has become its reluctant reformer. His reign began in the shadow of his mother's legacy, but it now stands on its own, etched with pain, but also progress. He has learned that the crown can crack, that it must bend, and that sometimes the truest act of leadership is to admit when you've failed the people who served you most. Prince William watches closely. The future king has seen what fire can destroy and what truth can rebuild. He and Princess Catherine have vowed to uphold the new safety standards in their own households, to teach their children that being royal means serving those around you. Titles protect nothing if the walls burn down. And now, those walls will be safer than ever. In the end, the tragedy at Sandringham left more than scars. It left a legacy, a monarchy still wrapped in pageantry, but no longer in silence. Margaret and James are gone, but in every rewired hallway, every new fire door, every staff handbook rewritten with care, they endure, not as footnotes to history, but as the spark that forced the crown to change. The flames may be out, but the consequences are just beginning. The tragic loss of two loyal staffers has pierced the heart of the royal household and shaken the very foundation of palace life. Grief has given way to accountability. Reforms are underway. But no amount of rebuilding can undo what was lost. For the royal family, this is not just a fire. It is a defining moment, and one the crown will carry for generations to come.